About a week before the death of Sir Walter Scott, he said to his son-in-law, Lockhart, "Read to me from the book." And when I asked him from what book, he said, "Need you ask? There is but one! One! The Bible in Scott's literature, James Moffat. An intelligent and talkative lady found herself at dinner seated beside a bishop. Having a social gift, she knew that most men are flattered to be met in conversation on their own grounds. And so she started to talk about the Bible. "I can't pretend that I read it as much as I should," she confessed. "And really, parts of it seem to me hopelessly out of date. Yet," she added broad-mindedly, "I'll admit that here are some very beautiful passages." "Yes," said the bishop. "For instance?" "Well, for example, that line about God tempering the wind to the shorn lamb. On the chance that there may be one or possibly two readers whose knowledge is no more exact than that of this fair lady, let us hasten to remark that God tempers the wind to the shorn lamb is in Sterne's Sentimental Journey, a book which resembles the Bible about as much as Robinson Crusoe resembles the Encyclopedia Britannica." "And now you must tell me your favorite verse," the lady continued brightly. "It would be hard for me to pick a single verse," the bishop answered, "but I can give you my favorite passage. It is the one that tells about Eliza crossing the ice. Not long ago I met a man who wanted to know which of the Old Testament books contains the verse, 'Thus saith the Lord, every tub shall stand upon its own bottom.' The answer is that both Jeremiah and Ezekiel give expression to bits of philosophy that resemble this, but not in words that bear any resemblance to it whatever." It would be easy to multiply such stories. They illustrate a strange phenomenon. Here is a book, or more properly a collection of books, which is beyond comparison the world's best seller. New novels grip the public's fancy for a few weeks or months and then disappear, but the Bible stands continuously at the top of the list. Go somewhere east of Suez, where there aren't no 10 Commandments, and what do you find? A fine big bookstore in Rangoon, which city you have to visit on the road to Mandalay. Centrally located and up to date with a modern printing office in the rear. American presses are turning out textbooks and literature of every sort, and Bibles, cords of Bibles, literally cords of them, go into the finest hotel in any American city. And on the stand at the head of your bed. The last thing to meet your glance at night and the first thing in the morning is a copy of this same most circulated book. Most circulated book. Nearly every home has at least one copy. Millions of copies are given at birthday, graduation, and Christmas gifts. It is a book that everybody buys and concerning which almost everybody is ready to engage in debate at the drop of a hat. Yet how many read it? How many know what it really contains? How many? It is worth knowing, not all of it, of course. There are long chapters of genealogy which are no more edifying than pages of the telephone directory. There are First and Second Chronicles, which recite the tedious mistakes and sins of kings who were no better than the kings of England, and not half so important in their influence on our lives. But when you have passed over such passages and everything else, that for popular reading is tiresome or useless, what have you left? These 4 great treasures. 1. A bird's eye view of the development of civilization, a sort of outline of history, as Mr. Wells would say. The story begins with the origin of the earth, just as Wells does, and for the first 11 chapters it deals with the human race as a unit, coming down to the time when races were grouped and nations arose. It traces the development of a particular people, the Hebrews, their beginnings as nomadic shepherds, their conquest and settlement of a home, and their emergence into national life, their rise to splendor under kings David and Solomon, their overthrow and captivity, and the re-establishment of their national cult or worship, though with very limited authority in the matter of government a century later. The recital brings us finally into definite touch with the civilizations of Greece and Rome, the latter being the dominant power throughout the whole period of the New Testament. Considered simply as an historic outline, this is a venture to challenge respect. Certainly no one can claim to know history who has not read and understood it. 2. Some of the greatest literature of all ages. Here, to mention only a few, are the greatest of all poems, one of the greatest dramas, one of the finest love stories, and a collection of proverbs which in varying phraseology have entered into the common sense philosophy of nearly every modern nation. 3. The best of all textbooks in human nature. William Lyon Phelps is a college professor, as well as an interesting writer and a remarkable human being. When he speaks of education, it is fair to assume that he knows what he is talking about. He says, I thoroughly believe in a university education for both men and women, but I believe a knowledge of the Bible without a college course is more valuable than a college course without the Bible. For in the Bible we have profound thought, beautifully expressed. We have the nature of boys and girls, of men and women, more accurately charted than in any work of any modern novelist or playwright. You can learn more about human nature by reading the Bible, than by living in New York. Finally, we have the story of the most successful life ever lived on this planet. The most successful life ever lived on this planet. The most successful life ever lived on this planet, a life that changed the course of human thought, and that still is able, after more than 1900 years, to transform individuals, communities, and nations. Surely it is worthwhile to know the high spots, at least, of a book that contains all this. Let us start at the beginning with the title page of the Common Version. The first line reads, the Holy Bible. Since the word Biblia in Latin is plural and means library, we know at once that we have here not a single book, but a collection of several books. The second line, containing the Old and New Testaments, means obviously that there are 2 main divisions and that the distinguishing feature is a difference in age, one group of books being more recent than the other. The third line says, translated out of the original tongues, indicating that the Bible was originally published not in English, but in more than one other language. And with the former translations diligently compared and revised, shows that this translation, which was made under the authority of King James I in 1611, is the successor to several earlier translations. Turning over the pages, we discover that the text is divided into numbered chapters and verses, which seems rather an unusual way to present a book until we learn that these divisions were not made by the original writers, but were inserted in 1551 by Mr. Robert Stevens, a pious printer who believed that more people would read the Bible if he made it easier to read. Several earlier attempts had been made to divide the books into chapters and verses, all of them unsatisfactory. The divisions of Mr. Stevens are far from perfect, and indeed the story goes that he made them while riding his horse to and fro between his home and the printing office, and that occasionally the horse stumbled and his pencil slipped. There are some glaring mistakes which would seem to lend color to this tale, but Mr. Stevens did remarkable work on the whole, and his general scheme will probably never be discarded. A single glance is enough to indicate that the Old Testament is much larger than the New. And here is an easy way to remember how many books are in each. The key number is 3, which multiplied by itself gives 9. The Old Testament has 39 books. Again, multiply 3 by 9 and you have 27, the number of the books in the New Testament. Once you get that into your mind, it is like 30 days has September. You can't forget it even if you try. Caesar, you remember, divided all Gaul into 3 parts. Similarly, scholars divide the Old Testament into 3 divisions. The historic books, beginning with Genesis and ending with Esther. The poetic books, beginning with Job, and ending with the Song of Songs, and the remainder, which consists of sermons, or as they are more commonly called, books of prophecy. Of the historic books, the first 5 have a certain unity which has long caused them to be regarded as one. They are called the Pentateuch, meaning the 5 in one book, and there is a tradition that Moses wrote them all. Whether he did or not, we can leave to the scholars to dispute, but there is no doubt that he is the dominating figure in all 5 books, and what a figure! These are the 5: Genesis, the book of beginnings; Exodus, the book of going out; Leviticus, the book for the priests; Numbers, a sort of amplified census report; Deuteronomy, a Greek name meaning second law or review and digest of the laws. There are some wonderful things in Leviticus for the student of history. For example, many of the laws of health and sanitation on which we moderns pride ourselves are distinctly set forth here. We think of the disinfection of a house where there has been contagious disease as a comparatively recent development in medical science, but Moses prescribed that the blankets of the sick man should be burned and the house thoroughly purified. Numbers also has some highlights, but speaking generally, these 2 books are less interesting than the other 3 and may well be omitted if one is reading to get the best in the easiest way. Start in then with the first chapter of Genesis and you are gripped at once. Here is no preface, no argument, only a great declaration. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Viewed only as a piece of good writing, that paragraph is superb. What a way to begin a story! How dignified, how impressive! How swift and sure the movement, how nobly superior to the Greek mythologies, and free from their grossness and puerility. There is an old anecdote, attributed usually to Charles A. Dana, about a reporter who protested that a certain news story could not be compressed into a column. Dana sent him to the Bible. "Read the first chapter of Genesis," he commanded. "You'll find the whole story of the creation in less than 600 words. It is true. The whole story is there in one chapter. Majestic in its simplicity. Majestic in its simplicity, every line fraught with meaning and interest. Every line fraught with meaning and interest." If you argue that evolution tells the story very differently, your argument is only partly true. What does evolution say? That in the beginning there was nothing but nebulous matter, that it gathered itself first into hot, shapeless planets, which by revolving grew round, then into land and water, that gradually vegetation appeared, then life in low forms, then higher forms, and finally man. Look back at Genesis, and you are surprised perhaps to discover a certain method of progress in its account, which is not at all at variance with the best scientific knowledge. It too starts with matter fluid and formless, without form and void, but the matter is not wholly inert. The creative spirit, the scientists say, the first cause, which means nothing much except that they don't know, is brooding over that vast shapeless egg and incubating something of purpose. The matter is in motion. It separates itself into masses. There is this distinction between that which belongs to the earth and that which is of other bodies. Upon the earth the waters gather into oceans, and land is seen in continents. Then we emerge into biology. Life appears first in low and simple forms. Life in the water and life in the air. Life that creeps and life that flies and life that walks. The higher animals are evolved or created, whichever term suits you better. And last of all, man. Last of all, man. His place at the top of the pyramid of creation is the same in both Genesis and geology. The difference being that Genesis compresses into 600 words what science expands into hundreds of volumes, and Genesis has a reason for man's creation and a goal for his life, while science throws up its hands with the blank admission, "We do not know." So we have man and woman launched forth upon a brand new planet. Science locates the beginnings of human life in the fertile and fragrant valley of the Euphrates. Genesis is more specific, naming the beautiful spot, the Garden of Eden, and identifying the first couple as Adam and Eve. Let us take a running look at these two interesting people and the more important of their descendants, for in the Old Testament, as in all other historical records, the history of peoples is principally the lives of a few outstanding individuals. Just a few outstanding individuals. A lecturer on woman suffrage once challenged her audience with the oratorical question, I ask you, where would man be today if it were not for woman? To which a rather thick voice from the rear benches answered, "In the Garden of Eden, eating strawberries." Adam, our first ancestor, does not make a very brave showing. He and Eve were given the run of the garden, with permission to eat any fruit, except that of one particular tree. They ate the forbidden fruit. And when God discovered them in their transgression, Adam took refuge behind Eve. The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, he complained. She gave me of the tree, and I did eat. A cowardly excuse, which profited him nothing. For their sin, they were cast out. Out! And the garden was closed to them. No longer could they have food without effort. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Eve had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. As a shepherd, Abel had nothing to do but sit on the side of a green hill and watch his flocks grow fat, making money for him the while. Cain was a farmer, and anyone who has ever worked on a farm understands why farmers in all ages have been discontented and will realize how Cain felt. In his jealousy over Abel's easy life and calm demeanor, Cain slew him. Am I my brother's keeper? He demanded in surly tones. Am I my brother's keeper? 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 Am I? 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 Am I my brother's keeper? He demanded in surly tones when God made inquiry for Abel. The question has come down through the generations as a text for 1 million. A million sermons. Cain seems to have had good stuff in him, regardless of his envious nature and terrible temper. At least his descendants were successful. One of them, Jubal, was the first musician, and another, Tubal Cain, as the first blacksmith, founded the useful arts. We skip over a number of other interesting characters, noting only that there were giants in those days and that men lived to wondrous old age. Adam, in spite of the necessity for hard work, hung on for a matter of 930 years. But the prize for longevity goes to Methuselah, who established the world's record for 969 years. He passed away in the year of the flood. There is no telling how long he might have lived under a dry regime. Old as these patriarchs were, they did not learn wisdom with their years. In fact, their misdemeanors were so flagrant that it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. There seemed to be no remedy but to wipe out the whole race and make a fresh start. Whew! One man and his family, Noah, his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were selected for survival, and Noah was instructed to build an ark that would hold them, together with a male and female representative of each species. He was allowed to warn his neighbors. When in any age has the hopeful human race been willing to face bad news? They jeered at his stories of the coming storm. They stood around the dry dock where he was working on his ark and passed the same sort of crude jokes with which the folks of a later day greeted Fulton and his Claremont. Noah was angry, but he kept at work and had the last laugh. The rain began. And every living substance was destroyed which was upon the face of the ground. The ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the foul of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive. And they that were with him in the ark. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. God has never again indulged in this wholesale effort at reformation, probably because he discovered that the first attempt did so little good. The descendants of Noah lived much shorter lives than the patriarchs, but they were up to pretty much all the bad tricks, as we shall see. One thing which makes the Bible so interesting and so educational is the fact that it presents its great figures in their entirety. No cloaking of their mistakes, no effort to set them up on pedestals. We see ourselves. We see ourselves in these pages. With all our passions and frailties, all our hopes and affections, our victories and defeats. Years passed and grew to centuries, and the great figure of Abraham emerged, a wealthy shepherd having flocks that roamed over so wide an area that he was brought into conflict with rival ranchmen and had to fight for his rights.